My wife said she's leaving me for her ex and taking the house and kids, but when I told her the house wasn't even in my name, she completely lost her mind and her entire plan fell apart. I need to share what just happened because I still can't believe how spectacularly someone's greed and arrogance can backfire. My name is Andrew, I'm 35 years old, and until last week I thought I had a stable marriage with 2 beautiful kids. I was wrong about the marriage part, but at least I was smart enough to protect what really mattered. I met my now ex-wife Vanessa 8 years ago at a friend's birthday party. She was charming and beautiful, working as a receptionist at a dental office. I was already established in my career as an electrical engineer, making good money and looking to settle down. We dated for a year before getting married, and within 3 years we had 2 kids, a daughter Sophie who's now 5 and a son James who's 3. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Nice house in a good neighborhood, 2 cars, regular vacations, the whole picture. I worked hard to provide for my family while Vanessa stayed home with the kids. She'd always talked about going back to work once the kids were in school, but that conversation never seemed to materialize into actual plans. The house we lived in was a 4-bedroom colonial in a great school district. It was my dream home, and I'd saved for years to afford it. But here's the detail that becomes important later: the house wasn't actually in my name. It was in my mother's name. Let me explain why. When I was looking to buy a house 8 years ago, right before I met Vanessa, my mother made me an offer. She had recently sold her business for a substantial amount and wanted to help me get started. She offered to buy a house outright and let me live in it, with the understanding that I would inherit it eventually. Her reasoning was that this way the house would be protected from any potential creditors if my business ventures ever went south, and it would simplify estate planning since I'm an only child. My mother was always shrewd about money. She'd built her business from nothing and had seen plenty of people lose everything in divorces or lawsuits. She wanted to make sure I was protected. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious, but I agreed because it made financial sense and saved me from taking on a massive mortgage. When Vanessa and I got married, I told her the house was in my mother's name but that it was essentially mine through inheritance. She didn't love the idea but accepted it. Over the years, she'd occasionally bring up putting the house in both our names or at least in my name legally, but I always deflected. My mother had been clear that the house would stay in her name until she passed, and honestly, I saw no reason to change that arrangement. About 6 months ago, I started noticing changes in Vanessa's behavior. She was on her phone constantly, smiling at texts and being secretive about who she was talking to. She started going to the gym more often, buying new clothes, and paying a lot more attention to her appearance. She'd go out with friends multiple times a week, sometimes not coming home until late at night. I asked her several times if everything was okay between us. She'd always say she was fine, just enjoying having more independence now that the kids were getting older. I trusted her, or maybe I was just in denial. Looking back, all the signs were there, but I didn't want to see them. 3 weeks ago, I came home early from work because I wasn't feeling well. I walked into the house and heard Vanessa on the phone in our bedroom. She didn't know I was home. I stood in the hallway and listened, feeling sick to my stomach as I heard her conversation. She was talking to someone named Derek, telling him how much she missed him and couldn't wait until they could be together properly. She talked about our house, my income, and how she'd planned everything perfectly. She said once the divorce was final, she'd get the house and primary custody of the kids, plus child support and probably alimony. She said Derek wouldn't have to worry about money because I made plenty and would be funding their life together. I stood there frozen, listening to my wife casually discuss dismantling my life so she could be with another man. She talked about me like I was just an obstacle, a paycheck that came with inconvenient feelings. When she finally ended the call, I walked into the bedroom and confronted her. Vanessa's face went white when she saw me. She tried to claim it wasn't what it sounded like, that Derek was just a friend, but I wasn't buying it. I told her I'd heard everything. She stared at me for a moment, then her expression changed completely. The mask dropped, and I saw someone I didn't recognize. She told me she'd been seeing Derek for 4 months. Derek was her ex-boyfriend from before we met, and they'd reconnected on social media. She said she'd never really gotten over him and that being with me had been a mistake. She said she'd try to make it work, but she couldn't deny her feelings anymore. I asked her about the kids, about the 8 years we'd spent together, about the vows we'd made. She said the kids would be fine, that plenty of children have divorced parents. As for our marriage, she said people change and grow apart, and it was better to be honest now than waste more years pretending. Then she laid out her plan with shocking casualness. She was filing for divorce and would be requesting primary custody of the kids. She expected to keep the house since she was the primary caregiver and the kids needed stability. She'd calculated that between child support and alimony, she'd receive about 60% of my take-home income. She'd already consulted with a lawyer, apparently. She said I could visit the kids on weekends and would need to find an apartment. She suggested I move out within the month to make the transition easier. She said Derek would be moving in once I left, and they were planning to get married once our divorce was final. She had this entire future planned out, and all of it was funded by my money while I was pushed out of my own life. I sat there listening to this, and instead of feeling angry, I felt strangely calm. She'd made one massive miscalculation, and I was about to watch her entire plan crumble. I asked her if she'd discussed the house with her lawyer. She said of course, and that her lawyer assured her she'd get to keep it since she was the primary parent and had been a homemaker throughout our marriage. That's when I told her the truth. The house wasn't in my name. It was in my mother's name and always had been. I had no ownership stake in it whatsoever. Which meant she couldn't take it in a divorce because it wasn't marital property. She'd be leaving with whatever she came into the marriage with, plus potentially some of my savings and future support payments, but the house she'd been planning to live in with Derek belonged to my mother. Vanessa's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and then pure panic. She said I was lying, that I'd told her the house was mine. I reminded her that I'd always been clear the house was in my mother's name. She said she thought that was just a technicality, that obviously I owned it in practice. I told her that legally, ownership is all that matters, and legally, I own nothing. She started yelling, saying I deceived her and trapped her. I pointed out the irony of her accusing me of deception while she'd been planning to leave me for months and had calculated exactly how much of my money she'd take. She said that was different, that she deserved the house after sacrificing her career to raise our kids. I told her she was certainly entitled to argue that in divorce court, but she couldn't claim a house that belonged to someone else. Vanessa called her lawyer right there in front of me. I could hear her frantic explanation and then the long pause as the lawyer apparently confirmed what I'd said. She hung up looking devastated. She asked what we were supposed to do now, where she and the kids would live. I told her that was her problem to figure out, since she was the one choosing to leave. She tried to backtrack then, saying maybe she'd been hasty and we should try counseling. I told her absolutely not. She'd shown me exactly who she was and what I meant to her. I told her she could move in with Derek since that was her plan anyway, and we'd work out custody arrangements through lawyers. I said I'd be filing for divorce immediately and would be seeking primary custody since I could provide stable housing and she apparently couldn't. Update 1. The week after our confrontation has been absolute chaos, and Vanessa's panic has escalated to levels I didn't think possible. The day after I told her about the house, she called my mother and tried to convince her to sign the house over to us jointly. My mother, bless her, told Vanessa in no uncertain terms that would never happen and that she was disappointed Vanessa had been planning to betray me. My mother also informed Vanessa that if she tried to claim any right to the house, my mother would pursue any legal action necessary to protect her property. Vanessa apparently cried and begged, saying she had nowhere to go and needed to think of the kids. My mother told her she should have thought about the kids before planning to destroy their family for an ex-boyfriend. Vanessa then tried a different approach with me. She suggested we could all keep living in the house together while we figured out the divorce, for the kids' sake. I told her I'd already spoken with a lawyer and would be the one staying in the house since it belonged to my mother and I had her permission to remain there. Vanessa would need to find other accommodations. She said she couldn't afford to rent a place big enough for her and the kids on her own. I pointed out that Derek presumably had a place. She admitted that Derek lived in a one-bedroom apartment and had roommates. I asked her how she'd planned to move him into my house when he couldn't even afford his own place. She said Derek had been planning to quit his job as a warehouse supervisor once they got settled, since my child support would cover their expenses. So her grand plan had been to kick me out of a house I didn't even own, move in her unemployed ex-boyfriend, and live off my income. The audacity was stunning. I told her that her poor planning wasn't my emergency and that she needed to figure out her living situation quickly because I wanted her out of the house within 2 weeks. Vanessa started calling relatives, trying to find someone who would take her in temporarily. Her parents live in a retirement community with strict rules about long-term guests, so that wasn't an option. Her sister has a small apartment and 3 kids of her own. None of her friends were offering to house her and 2 small children indefinitely. She was realizing that her support system wasn't nearly as robust as she'd assumed. Meanwhile, Derek apparently wasn't taking the news well either. According to Vanessa, during one of her many meltdowns, Derek had been promised a comfortable life in a nice house with minimal responsibilities. Finding out that Vanessa would be broke and homeless with 2 kids made him significantly less interested in their relationship. He told her she needed to figure out her situation before he could commit to anything serious. The man who she was leaving me for, who she'd claimed was her true love, was backing away the moment things got difficult. It would be poetic if it wasn't so pathetic. Vanessa tried to convince me this was proof Derek wasn't a good person and that maybe we should work things out. I told her I had no interest in being her backup plan after her first choice failed. My lawyer filed for divorce and for primary custody of the kids. The custody request was strategic, my lawyer explained. Even if I didn't get primary custody, asking for it strengthened my negotiating position and showed I was serious about being an active parent. It also terrified Vanessa, who'd assumed she'd automatically get the kids. Her lawyer apparently explained that custody isn't automatically awarded to mothers anymore, and that my stable housing situation and steady income actually put me in a strong position. The fact that she'd been planning to move a boyfriend she'd been seeing for 4 months into the family home wouldn't look good to a judge either. Vanessa finally moved out 10 days after our confrontation. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, depleting what little savings she had for the deposit and first month's rent. Derek did not move in with her. According to mutual friends, he'd decided the situation was too complicated and he wasn't ready for an instant family. So Vanessa left her marriage, her comfortable home, and financial security for a man who dumped her the moment she actually needed him. She took Sophie and James to her apartment, and I got them on weekends. Seeing my kids only part-time was killing me, but my lawyer assured me we'd work toward a better arrangement. Update 2. 2 months have passed since Vanessa moved out, and the contrast between our lives is stark. I'm still in the comfortable family home with space for the kids to play and a yard for them to run around in. Vanessa is in a cramped apartment where Sophie and James have to share a small bedroom and there's no outdoor space. The kids have been asking why they can't live at home anymore. Sophie especially doesn't understand why mommy took them away from their house. Vanessa has been telling them that daddy forced them to leave, but Sophie is smart enough to be confused by that since daddy is still in their house. Vanessa's financial situation has deteriorated rapidly. She had to get a job, but after being out of the workforce for 6 years, her options were limited. She's working as a receptionist again, making barely enough to cover her rent and basic expenses. She's been asking me for money beyond the temporary support my lawyer advised I pay, claiming she can't afford groceries or clothes for the kids. I've been providing for the kids directly instead of giving Vanessa cash. I buy their clothes, pay for their activities, and make sure they have everything they need. When they're with me on weekends, I send them back to Vanessa's with enough food for several days. I'm not letting my kids suffer, but I'm also not funding Vanessa's poor life choices. The divorce proceedings have been contentious. Vanessa is fighting for primary custody and maximum child support. My lawyer has been systematically dismantling her arguments. The fact that I have stable, appropriate housing while she's in a cramped apartment works in my favor. The fact that she left the marriage for another man and planned to move him in with the kids also doesn't help her case. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that the house should be considered a marital asset since I'd lived there throughout the marriage. My mother had to submit documentation proving ownership and explaining our arrangement. The judge seemed skeptical of Vanessa's claim, especially when it came out that she'd been told from the beginning the house wasn't in my name. The most satisfying moment in court so far was when Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint her as a devoted mother who sacrificed everything for her children. My lawyer presented evidence of her 4-month affair, including text messages between her and Derek where they discussed their future together and how my money would fund their lifestyle. The messages where she calculated my income and discussed how much she'd get in the divorce were particularly damaging. The judge was not impressed. He made a comment about how planning to leave a marriage is one thing, but calculating financial benefits while still married showed a concerning level of premeditation and self-interest. Vanessa tried to claim the messages were taken out of context, but the context was pretty clear. Vanessa has been trying to get back together. She calls crying, saying she made a terrible mistake and that we should try to work things out for the kids. She says she never really loved Derek and was just confused. She says she sees now how good she had it and wants another chance. I've stopped engaging with these attempts. My lawyer advised me to keep all communication focused on the kids and nothing else. Sophie asked me last week why mommy is always sad now. I told her that mommy is going through some changes but that both of us love her and James very much. I'm trying hard not to badmouth Vanessa to the kids, even though she's apparently been telling them that daddy is being mean by not giving her more money. My lawyer says this could constitute parental alienation if it continues. Derek has completely disappeared from the picture. He blocked Vanessa on everything after she kept calling and texting him when she was desperately looking for housing. According to mutual friends, he's been telling people that Vanessa was crazy and that he dodged a bullet. The man she destroyed her marriage for has now branded her as the crazy ex he escaped from. Update 3. 4 months since the separation, and the divorce is nearly finalized. The judge awarded me primary custody of Sophie and James, with Vanessa getting them every other weekend and one evening per week. The custody arrangement is essentially the reverse of what she'd planned for me. The judge cited my stable housing, steady income, and the fact that I'd been equally involved in parenting despite working full-time. Vanessa was devastated by the custody decision. She tried to argue that children need their mother, but the judge was clear that both parents are equally important and that he was ruling based on what was best for the children's stability and well-being. Living in a 4-bedroom house with a yard beat a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Having a parent who could afford activities and necessities beat a parent who was constantly struggling financially. The financial settlement was equally disappointing for Vanessa. Because the marriage was relatively short and she'd been having an affair, she received minimal alimony, only 2 years of support to help her get back on her feet. Child support was calculated based on the custody arrangement, and since I have the kids most of the time, the amount I pay is much lower than she'd anticipated. Vanessa had calculated that she'd be receiving around $5,000 monthly between alimony and child support. The actual amount is less than half that, and it's only temporary. In 2 years, she'll be on her own financially. Her dreams of being supported indefinitely while living comfortably with Derek have evaporated completely. She had to move to an even smaller apartment after the divorce was finalized because she couldn't afford the previous one. She's now in a 1-bedroom where Sophie and James sleep in the bedroom and she sleeps on a couch in the living room. The kids have been asking if they can stay with me instead of going to mommy's apartment, and it breaks my heart every time. My lawyer has documented their requests and Vanessa's living situation. If things don't improve, we may go back to court to modify the custody arrangement further. Vanessa knows this and has been scrambling to make her place more suitable for the kids, but there's only so much you can do with limited money and space. The most ironic part of this whole situation is that Vanessa keeps complaining about how I ruined her life. She tells anyone who will listen that I trapped her in a marriage by lying about the house, that I'm vindictive and controlling, that I turned the courts against her. She takes no responsibility for her own choices. She chose to have an affair. She chose to plan leaving me while calculating how much of my money she'd take. She chose to assume the house was hers without actually verifying ownership. She chose to trust a man who abandoned her the moment she actually needed him. Every single consequence she's facing is the direct result of her own decisions, but in her mind, I'm somehow the villain. My mother and I have discussed what will happen to the house long term. She's getting older and has been thinking about estate planning. She's decided to put the house in a trust with me as the trustee and beneficiary. This way it remains protected, but it's clear that the house will be mine eventually. She's also added a provision that the house can never be claimed by a spouse in a divorce, protecting it for future generations. Sophie and James are adjusting well to the new normal. They have their own rooms again, their friends can come over to play, and they're back in their familiar neighborhood and schools. They see Vanessa regularly, but they've stopped asking to stay at her place. They're comfortable and happy at home with me, and that's what matters most. I've started dating again, though I'm being very careful and taking things slowly. The experience with Vanessa taught me to pay attention to character and values, not just attraction and compatibility. I'm also being very cautious about introducing anyone to my kids. They've been through enough upheaval without adding more complications. Work has been going well. My boss actually commented that I seem more focused and productive than I had been in the year before the divorce. I realized I'd been carrying the stress of a failing marriage without even knowing it. Now that I'm not dealing with Vanessa's mood swings and secretive behavior, I'm sleeping better and performing better at my job. Financially, I'm in a better position than I was during the marriage. Even with child support and the temporary alimony, I'm spending less money than when Vanessa was constantly shopping and going out. I've been able to increase my retirement contributions and start college funds for both kids. I'm building wealth instead of just maintaining our lifestyle. The final divorce decree came through last week. I'm officially single again. Vanessa tried one last time to reconcile before signing the papers, showing up at the house crying and begging. She said she'd made the biggest mistake of her life and would do anything to fix it. She said Derek meant nothing and that I was the only man she'd ever really loved. I told her that if I'd been the only man she really loved, she wouldn't have spent 4 months planning to leave me for someone else. I told her that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day through your actions. She chose Derek over me, chose money over loyalty, chose her own desires over our family. Those choices revealed who she really was. She asked what she was supposed to do now. I told her she'd figure it out, just like I'd had to figure out how to deal with the betrayal and rebuild my life. I told her she was young, employed, and capable. She'd make a life for herself eventually, but it wouldn't include me. Vanessa finally accepted that we were done. She signed the papers and left. I haven't heard from her since except for brief texts about picking up or dropping off the kids. Our communication is purely functional now, which is how it should have been from the start once she decided to leave. Looking back at everything that happened, I'm grateful for my mother's foresight in keeping the house in her name. If it had been in my name, Vanessa might have succeeded in taking it. I'd be the one in a small apartment seeing my kids on weekends, paying the majority of my income to support her life with Derek. Instead, my kids are with me in a stable, comfortable home. I have my financial freedom. And Vanessa is learning the hard way that actions have consequences. She gambled everything on a fantasy life that fell apart the moment reality intruded. She assumed she held all the cards, but she'd been playing with borrowed chips the entire time. The house situation was the first domino that knocked down her entire plan. Without the house, she couldn't offer Derek the comfortable lifestyle she'd promised. Without Derek, she had no reason to leave beyond her affair being exposed. Without any leverage, she couldn't negotiate for primary custody or substantial support. Her whole scheme depended on that one asset, and it was never hers to begin with. I've been asked by friends if I feel bad for Vanessa and everything she's going through. The honest answer is no. She made calculated decisions to hurt me and break up our family for her own benefit. The fact that those decisions backfired doesn't make me feel sympathy, it makes me feel vindicated. She didn't leave because she was unhappy, she left because she thought she could trade up to a better situation. She was wrong. My focus now is on being the best father I can be to Sophie and James. They didn't ask for any of this, and they're the real innocent victims of their mother's choices. I'm making sure they know they're loved, that they're safe, and that they can count on me to always be there for them. That's more than their mother gave them when she prioritized her affair over their well-being. The story of Vanessa has become something of a cautionary tale in our social circle. People have been more supportive of me than I expected, especially once the details of her planning came out. Several friends have privately told me they suspected something was wrong but didn't want to interfere. A few have apologized for initially suggesting I should try to work things out with her. I'm rebuilding my life piece by piece. I have my kids, my home, my career, and my self-respect. Vanessa has a cramped apartment, a job that barely pays the bills, limited time with her children, and the reputation of someone who destroyed her family for a man who didn't even want her. We both made choices, and we're both living with the results. The house that she thought would be her security and her future with Derek remains exactly where it always was, protecting me and my children just like my mother intended. Sometimes the best revenge is simply having been smarter than the person who tried to hurt you.